Santa Cruz das Flores had never been such a busy town. A total of 36 different planes had landed in the past 24 hours, and all of them had been jets carrying officials from various international governments. That wasn't even counting the American, British, and Russian military planes that had been landing on the fleet of aircraft carriers crowded around the small vacation island in the Atlantic Ocean. The Portuguese government had been congratulated for their openness and cooperation by the international community, and placed in command of investigating whatever thing had just risen from the depths. The Americans had protested, as they were under the impression that this was an extraterrestrial spaceship, and they were, of course, entitled to first contact. Others had voiced their concern about touching the discovery at all, but they were a tiny, albeit vocal, minority. Portugal's taking command came in the form of General Luís Alfonso de Espinas Almeida, a tall, serious man who wasn't wearing half the medals and decorations he could have pinned to his uniform. He was sitting in the dining room of the town's largest hotel, which had been cleared of the seating arrangements one might expect to find in a restaurant to make way for a roughly horseshoe-shaped conference space. It was the single largest room in Santa Cruz das Flores, and it was quite large for something in a town with barely more than 2,000 inhabitants. "Strike team stand by for breach, sir," said a radio voice coming from the command center of the USS Ulysses S. Grant. "We're waiting on your orders." The Spanish puffed. It was as though they expected him to be unfamiliar with military protocol. He looked into the round of scientists, engineers, commanders, and UN ambassadors, all impatiently awaiting his next move. There was only one move he could make. "Breaches go," the general declared in heavily accented English. His eyes were drawn to a huge flat screen, where footage of the gigantic object captured by the cameras of military helicopters was displayed. It was a flat oval, at least if one could consider something that was over 100 meters thick, flat, with a smooth, streamlined black surface and a dome the size of a shopping mall protruding from the middle. Presumably, the dome was made out of some transparent material, but it was too densely covered in shellfish and algae to be anything but impenetrable. To everyone's surprise, the rest of the hall was untouched by marine life. The 1st Commando Unit rappelled down from an assault helicopter, and others soon followed at different spots on the object. They were landing near what his scientific advisors considered to be entry hatches, and from what the Spanish could tell, one did not exactly need a doctorate in alien spaceship design to determine where the doors were on this thing. What he hadn't anticipated was that said doors would open without any struggle as soon as they were approached. Judging from the various helmet camera feeds displayed on an assortment of smaller screens, they all looked the same. A tunnel with an arched roof and shining cobalt walls, segmented like an earthworm. The floor was tiled white, and it was soon apparent that these tiles were also the source of the soft, mint-tinged light illuminating the corridor. The strike teams entered, and it wasn't long until they found something. The Russian team was first. A room, the door of which opened just as readily as the front gate had, almost presented itself to them. Inside, the only light came from their torch attachments, so the Spanish needed a moment to register what he saw. On 4 silver benches lay 4 corpses of dead humans. 3 were women, the other was a man, and all of them were entirely pale, as though drained of blood. Their peaceful faces were almost as unnerving as their attire, which seemed to be made of rough hemp and decorated with simple line patterns. One of the soldiers said something in Russian, and the attending Russian ambassador let the Spanish know that he was commenting on how short these people were. The Americans were next, and their discovery had everyone in the little dining room frowning. Once again, it was a burial chamber, with 4 bodies on 4 silver benches. These looked distinctly Asiatic, and while 3 of them once again wore simple, primitive clothing, one man was clad in what seemed to be a suit of armor. One Japanese scientist gasped and said something in his native tongue, but the Spinners recognized one of the words: samurai. A group with more contemporary attire was found by the Chinese team, who opened a chamber containing 4 young people with tattoos, facial piercings, and dyed hair. Their clothes were dark, and one of them was wearing a leather cloak. A total of 34 such chambers were investigated, and inside was always the same thing. 4 people, all from the same time period and geographical region, coming overall from vastly different places and eras of the world. Eventually, the Spinners ordered the teams to make straight for the dome, which he assumed to be the command center. Over 100 more doors opened for the soldiers, and the occasional glance into them suggested that they were all the same as the first 34. Zulu warriors, Celtic shamans, Polynesian fishermen, Victorian house servants, Punic riders, Aztec farmers. The variety was stunning. It ended up being the French team that made it to the dome first. Despite being covered in sea life from the outside, the blue sky was visible from the inside as though there wasn't even a sheet of glass there. Standing inside the dome, pointing up at the sky, was the enormous statue of a golden person. It had no face or discernible sex, but it was definitely pointing at the stars. Gasps and murmurs went through the room, followed by applause as people realized that this could be humanity's invitation to the stars. Talk of galactic federations, endless riches, and new technologies erupted as the other teams also entered the dome. But something did not seem right to Luis Alfonso de Spinas Almeida. Something about the statue was just wrong. The way it stood was not optimistic at all. There was no face, but the body language carried an obvious message. "It is not pointing at the stars," he said, quieting the room with the weight of his authority. "It is saying,